Well, everyone, I am especially excited about my interview today because when Chrysal became a sponsor of our podcast earlier this year, I knew we had to have a conversation about flower food and all the inner workings of that. And so today our guest is Dennis from Chrysal. Welcome, Dennis, to the Flower Podcast.
Thank you, Scott. Glad to be here. I'm
So,
excited. I'm
yeah.
excited. We're going to talk flower food.
Yes, that's right. Flower food rocks. I love it. So, it's interesting because with my background in wholesale, some wholesalers I've worked for are water only. Some wholesalers I work for, like the one currently, is a strong believer in flower food, and we use it in every bucket. In fact, it's hard to find not water without flower food in our
It's
building.
fantastic. That's great.
So, before we jump into just how this all works, I just was curious, how did you end up in the world of flowers, especially what you're doing now?
Hey, that's a great question. It was actually my wife who got me here. She actually started in the flower industry before I did.
Wow.
She worked for CFX La Florette,
Yeah.
and she was actually a pioneer putting flowers into supermarkets. And anyway, so I was at the time, I was in the nursery business. So I was working in greenhouses. And we actually went through, we were using some chemical that basically killed everything. And so the company was at a point where starting over or or not. And so they chose not to, and I chose to leave the business. So I thought, let me try the flower business. So my wife since has left, and I went to work for an importer, and I worked for an importer for 3 years selling flowers. And I loved the industry. I said, hey, this is a niche. I didn't search out the flower business. It's just kind of one of those things you didn't know what you want to be when you grow up, right?
Absolutely.
So I got there and I said, I like this industry. I'm interested, but I didn't like selling boxes because that's all I was doing is moving boxes. The interesting part is, okay, now I go back to my wife. When she was interviewing for the job for CFX La Florette, there was another lady. They're both named Lisa. They were both applying for the same job, and they loved them both that they hired both of them. So
Wow.
anyway, long story short, my wife and her became best friends and are still friends today. And that was 40 years ago. And anyway, so she introduced me to Jim Kaplan, who was the president of, at the time, it was called Pocon and Chrysal. So that's how I found my way to Pocon and Chrysal. So I started in plants, moved to flowers, and then I found this company that, hey, they do plants and flowers. So had products for both. So it was just a fantastic match for me. And, you know, that's how I got here. So it's, just, I guess it was meant to be. It seems like it was planned, but it wasn't planned at all. It was just the right people connecting you and putting you in the right place. And here I am 29 years later with Chrysal, and still enjoying the industry and still enjoying the business and new experiences. It's my first podcast, so there you
There you
go.
go. Yeah. Yeah. You're doing great so far. I think it's really interesting, and it's so funny. And I've said this on the podcast before, but I feel like the flower industry is like the mafia. Once you're in, you can never get out. And I always think it's interesting how and I've said this before on the podcast, where we're this gigantic industry with this small community, and
Very small.
it's amazing, how
Yep.
easily connected, we are to each other. And we always have people we know in common and things, and that's one thing I think is great. And the fact you have been with Chrysal for so long says a lot about both you and Chrysal, I think. And I know that it's a name that is synonymous with quality and with helping us keep our flowers alive longer. And I just I'm really looking forward to the chance to kind of dive into some of that and to remove the mystery, so to speak.
Right.
I know we all know, because I think because we eat, right? We understand food, we understand the
Right,
concept behind it,
right.
but there's a lot of people who maybe don't waste. They feel like they're wasting time using the product. Maybe they don't, because they move flowers too fast. But I feel like there's a lot of benefits on the consumer side of it for those of us that either grow flowers or sell flowers. And I kind of didn't know if maybe you could help break it down to begin with, because I know you guys have a gazillion solutions, and each one does something very special. And I don't know, maybe I don't know where a good place to jump in is, but maybe you
Like,
can explain to us this works.
yeah, no, it's interesting. You know, it's when you think about it, in flowers in the US, especially, we have one of the longest transportation times. Even when people are moving flowers fast, it's not like farm fresh from a local grower, farm to table kind of concept. We're still being harvested in Colombia or Ecuador, or could be other parts of the world, and then getting on a plane and being processed and going through that channel in Miami or wherever the port is it's coming into, getting on a truck and then being redistributed and ending up at a wholesaler and going through the process at a wholesaler and finding its way to the retail florist. And even if things are turning fast, you're still looking at a good 7 days, before that consumer has it in their hands, and could obviously be much longer, as you know, because
Sure.
there's holdups or a delay at the port, or a delay getting on the plane, and it's going to happen. It's not a matter of if or when, or it all happens, and it happens all the time. And then people who get into the concept of, I move it so fast, maybe they do 60% of it or 70%, but it's that 30% that's not moving fast. Now, who wins in the big picture is going to be the consumer, no matter what. If it's moving fast, the consumer is going to get a win. But you have to look at, how do those flowers finish life, right?
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
everything you're doing and every step getting it to the consumer affects its life. I like to use the human body as an analogy, because, like you said, we understand that. Um, we suffer from dehydration. We suffer from hormonal imbalances at times, or stress causes a lot of, it can cause us to get sick. If we're hungry, we get hangry. All these kind of things
Yeah.
play into this. So you know now, making flowers last longer isn't really what we do. We maximize the potential of that flower. So what potential does that flower have? Well, there's a lot of variables that go into that. It could be the species, it could be the handling, it could be, so maybe by the time they get to the consumer on day one, they may look the same, but do they make it 5 days? Do they make it 6 days, 7 days, 8 days? How long do they go? So my message is always, if you're moving them fast, then it's like, great, you can exceed their expectation, you
Right.
know, because the consumer, you have two opportunities with a consumer. And I think the first one is to receive flowers, right? There's that first bang. The second bang is when they overlap, exceed their expectations, last 7 days or longer. We assume that consumers are just happy with flowers just because we didn't get a complaint, and that's very typical. And I can tell you, I can attest to, that's not true, because I go out to eat a lot, and if we get a bad meal, I won't say a word. I'll pay a tip. I'll say it was great. Thank you. It was all wonderful. I just won't go back again. Now, my wife on the plus side will complain, which is a good thing. And I say, I look at him and go, be happy she's telling you, because now you have an opportunity to improve. So I'm betting that there's more people like me who just walk out and don't ever give them the message they need to hear. So I get the feeling that we're not exceeding consumer expectations. And even though I've been doing this 29 years and preaching it, I feel like I still have to keep going. And yes, you're right. Some florists have totally get it, are on board, and are exceeding expectations. But unfortunately, flowers are looked at as generic, and you have several in the middle there that aren't. You know, probably for every one that is, you've got one that isn't. And so, you know, there you go. But I'm all for exceeding expectations. And throughout that channel, there's something that has to be done at every step. And we consult at every step. We say grower to consumer, we're consulting all the way. So I deal with all aspects. It's not like I just work with retailer, just work with wholesaler, just, you know, we're working with growers, we're working with importers, we're working with wholesalers, we're working with retailers. And then of course, the consumer, you know, there's not much touch there. You know, the flower food is the little bit of communication that we have explaining, you know, cut the flowers and, you know,
Right.
use the food. And beyond that, you know, and that's the one thing when people say, what do you do for a living? And I go, oh boy, here we go. How do I explain this? Well, the little packet you get with a bouquet of flowers, they get it. Consumers know that. So if a florist isn't giving that, they need to think about it again, because they are getting it and they do know what it is. They don't know the name on it though. They couldn't tell you the brand, but they can tell you they do know of the product. So anyway, that was a
That's
long
amazing.
answer for a short
No,
question.
I thought it was perfect, and I've got a couple things I have to say. Um, One of which is that I'm thrilled that you said that you work with growers and you work with the florists and the wholesalers in between, because our audience is all of those people, and I feel like there are different needs and different products for different places in the floral chain, and I don't know that everybody understands the difference in some of that stuff. So I want to talk about that, but I want to say something. I want to touch base on something you just said about the restaurant situation. I'm like you, where I'm probably not going to say something unless it's just really, I mean, it's really off the charts bad, but I'm probably not going back. The thing that this product, a lot of times people get afraid of the added expense of this product. The thing I want people to understand is it's almost like paying for advertising, because if those flowers last longer, reaching their potential, to use your word, and make it maybe longer than the grocery store does, or maybe longer than another florist does, or another farmer does, then they're going to think, wow, their flowers are fresher, their flowers are healthier, their flowers are all those things, and flower food can make all that difference,
Oh yeah.
and getting that repeat customer. I mean, it's like it's huge. And
It's the secret sauce. A steak isn't just a steak, right?
yeah,
Or barbecue isn't just barbecue. You got to have that secret sauce, right? So
exactly.
Chrysal's that secret sauce. It's the lowest cost also. It's the lowest spend in that bouquet. When you think about it, it's not a high
True.
spend. And people say, well, I'm giving it away. Well, okay, then you're giving everything away for whatever price you charge, right?
Well, and a lot of times
So,
people give flowers, they don't, they underprice their flowers anyway. So it's
right,
kind of, that's kind of a lame excuse to say that when maybe this
right.
is already happening. And maybe I'm being too blunt. I don't know. But I feel, being that I've worked in places with and places without, I see the difference.
Yeah.
And a lot of the difference I see is like the impact on bacteria, and the impact on, anyway, I don't want to steal your thunder, because I want to I want to say it correctly. So, in essence, I'm holding up a pack of your food. So, what's in this little packet, or what does this little
Very
packet do
simple.
for flowers?
Yeah. Yeah, it's simple. It's energy. I mean, basically, carbohydrates is the number one in there, which is sugars. And then you have a small amount of biocide, and that's to keep the pollution in check. And then you have acidifiers. So we acidify the water. Flowers like a low pH. So tap water, usually neutral is 7. So
Mhm.
it's usually 7 and up typically. And when you add flower food, it'll drop to like 3.5, 4 pH. That's one way we check to see if somebody's using or not. Like if I were to walk into your wholesale house and you say, oh yeah, I use food, when you turn your back, I might take a little test and go, there's no food in there. Well, he must have missed that bucket. So I know how that goes. But anyway, but yeah, that's one way that you can at least know. So for instance, if somebody's wet pack shipping to you, you want to know, oh, I'm curious if they're using anything, and you check and there's a pH of 8, they're not using anything. So now there is one exception to that, if, because we sell a product called CVBN, which is a slow release chlorine, and that does nothing for pH. So that one's usually used as a short-term treatment, more on the quick turns, more as a field application when you're coming from the field to the cooler, pre-grading. And then once you grade it and ship it out wet or whatever every process is, like you said, I don't like to even start telling somebody how to do it. I say, tell me about your business. What do you do? I need to know how they do their business. I mean, because everybody's a little different, some, they design right from the box. And to me,
Makes me
flowers aren't
cringe.
design ready from the box. It's the worst way to do it. I understand, hey, you got that wedding, they had to be fatty skin, the first group got messed up, and yeah, you're going to have those situations, but it can't be your standard. It can't be your protocol that you set up for your everyday business, and I think that's the biggest thing biggest weakness I find across the board, by the way. Growers are better at it, but when I look at wholesale and retail, if I ask them, what is your protocol for care and handling? They can't tell me most of the time. And I think that they should know. It's like if a chef has a special, meal he makes, and you say, what's the special ingredients that you use to make this meal so tasty? I mean, I have the same meal here and it's not the same, right?
Right.
So I feel that there has to be protocols in place that your employees even know and understand why you're doing it. And you need to stick to it. And yeah, there's always instances where you could be a little different or tweak things a little tighter, but in most cases, people just need a basic program and set up a basic program and get going. And then you can build from there, because you'll see, hey, I'm performing well here, but I'm missing it over here. What's happening over here? And then you can dial in and work on those products. But when somebody goes from 0 to something, I try to keep it simple and build up, because it's a lot to come in and try to change everything. And by all means, I'm not a flower expert. I'm a care and handling expert. If somebody says, oh, what about this species? And I go, I don't know. What's the characteristics of that species? What does it do? So I depend on them to know, because they work with it every day. I don't. So, and it's always changing. New varieties are coming out all the time, new looks, yeah. So how they respond, are they, are they big drinkers? Do they have troubles hydrating? Do they wilt easy? Do they shatter? Do they yellow? Do they lose color? Do they, all these things come into play. And we go back to flower food. We're saying, okay, what's the acidifier do? Well, that helps uptake, right? What's the sugars do? That helps give it energy. So it helps. A lot of it you see in the bloom. It's going to help with color. If a flower has scent, it's going to help with scent, because all that's part of the maturing process of that flower. So
Yeah,
if
because
it
so
starts
many,
to,
I'm sorry, but like so many flowers are cut tight and they're not done developing. They're not done growing. So it needs that energy to become everything it was supposed to.
right, to bring it into full color, because it'll continue to grow. And so as it continues to grow, you're going to get full color. And if you have the energy and it has a scent, you'll get scent. If it doesn't, obviously, some of it's been, genetically changed, because a scented flower tends to have a shorter vase life. So,
Right.
they genetically pull it out so it'll last a little longer. But yeah, it's and then of course pollution. We know pollution is a big problem. And when the first place I start is clean. Start clean. Keep your environment clean, keep your tables clean, keep your floors clean, keep your coolers clean, keep your buckets clean. Start clean. Who doesn't want to work in a clean environment? Your employees want to work in a clean environment. You want to come to the shop in a clean environment, or into the wholesale house, or right? It builds a sense of pride with the employees. It builds a sense of, quality. And then it exudes within their business frame of mind when they talk about it. So I'm all about starting clean. You should never let it build up to where you have to deep scrub it to the point your elbows are squeaking. You maintenance that place daily. It's a daily event because you're making a mess daily. So, and then also when you keep it clean, you keep down things like botrytis. We
Yeah.
talked about, botrytis is spread through the air. So, and it doesn't really reveal itself until it gets to your shop. So, for the shops that get mad at their supplier saying, you sent me this garbage. Well, it didn't look like garbage when it left. So when those flowers go through some temperature swings and changes, highs and lows, that botrytis will pop up and there it goes in the edges and it spreads. So if you get some flowers in there and you're putting them on your bench and you're working and then you bring more flowers, you could be infecting other flowers in that process. So,
Right.
during botrytis season, you need to step it up even more, really sanitize. So, and then we get into cleaners. I think about, I like to ask if I ever in a group or whatever, how many use bleach to clean your buckets? And, of course you get a ton of hands. And then I say, that's expensive. And then they look at me like, this guy's nuts. And they go, I get it at Walmart. It's only, whatever, $2.99, or I don't know what the price of bleach is, but you know what I mean? Some low amount. And I'm going, yeah, but now your store smells like a locker room. I hate the smell of a locker room, right? And not only that, your employee who's happened to wash the buckets, his clothes look horrendous. They got, bleach spots everywhere, and he looks like a mess, Well, and he's the guy that can afford the least to be losing his clothes. So go to a commercial product, use a commercial product properly. I mean, don't be wasteful with it. If you manage a commercial product well and apply it, in a very manageable way, you can use it inexpensively. And it's not harsh on the hands. It's not harsh on the sinuses and the eyes and your clothes and everything. So it's a win-win. Because the cleaners are concentrates. So you're buying a concentrate and you're making a ready-to-use product. And it's not a killer in the dollars and cents area. So starting clean, and that goes for all levels. That goes for the farm, that goes for the wholesaler, that goes for the retailer. Everybody, that's a protocol they need to be on board with, keeping the environment clean. So,
yeah, I'm glad you started there, because I feel like that is one of those things that people don't realize the impact that has. And, and you just think about COVID. We just came through COVID and all that craziness. And you realize how easy it is to transfer that virus. And, so we should all have a clue just how easy it is to, or the importance of cleanliness. I want to a couple things. One is, I know you mentioned the CVBN, and you briefly kind of said, so what does this product do? Because like the products, I've heard people say, oh, I want to use that on dirty flowers, and like cutting in the field, cutting it and putting it straight into that. And I'm curious, is that the limit of it, or does it do more than just that?
When we developed CVBN, when it was created, we were focused on daffodils, actually. And
okay, I read that and I was like, what?
Yeah. Well, daffodils, they put off a slime, and this kills that slime, and the slime becomes toxic to the other flowers. So technically, you could throw a CVBN pill with daffodils and other flowers in a bouquet, and it will make it. They won't kill them, because the CVBN gets that slime in check. So it helps with those dirty flowers, because again, they're putting off pollutants, the same, they're secreting whatever, and they're affecting the other flowers too. Like, give you an example. Take a mixed bouquet with a rose, and then take a bouquet that's just roses, the same rose. That one that's mono is going to outperform the roses that are in the mixed bouquet, because these other flowers are polluting that rose and shortening its face life. So, we have solutions there, and we, one of them is called Rose Pro. That's where the concept of Rose Pro came up. Was we were focused on how do we get roses to last longer in a mixed bouquet, because we noticed that's the shorter one. So that's where Rose Pro came from. And people think, oh, it's only for roses. No, it's not. It's for all flowers, but the target was roses. So it's the same way with the CVBN. The target was this, but then you figure out all the residuals, and the residuals are a lot of the dirty plants. I mean, like for instance, we had all the dirty field grown flowers. And for instance, stock. We had a large grower who was shipping stock cross country, and by the time it got there, the buckets were just a mess. So typically, I never ever recommend mixing solutions. Don't make a home brew, a cocktail. But in this instance, we did it as an experiment and it worked. But they were using the Professional 2, which is a shipping solution, and added a tablet to it. And that was just to put that pollution in check, and it worked. But that is not a normal thing that we recommend mixing solutions at all, because you could have conflict if, but in this case, there was no conflict with what we were using. So we were able to do it. But yeah, basically it's a slow release chlorine that has a life of about 3 days. And it lasts a little longer, but then its ability to kill starts to slide. It's a scale. We start high, and then over time, it, slowly loses its, let's say, its ability to keep the pollution in check. And then eventually it goes on. That's why it's not a permanent solution. It's usually not a product you're going to put it in and put it in the vase and display it. It's more of a, like I said, treat it in the field, get it to the coolers, you grade it in a day or two, and go on from there. But yeah, that's where you would typically use that.
So then if once they're done grading, because I was speaking with a grower this morning actually, and I mentioned we were going to be talking, and they're like, oh, I'm so glad, because I know a lot of growers who will grade and cut and go into the professional solution number 1, and then there's some that skip that and go straight to 2, and then I even know one that stays in 1 and just leaves it in 1. So, and there may be a difference in, like you mentioned, shipping just now, and maybe there's, I don't know. So what's the difference in solution 1 and 2 and the advantages of either?
That's actually an excellent question, and I don't know if there's a straight answer. It's kind of like what you said. It kind of depends on their business model, and it kind of depends on how long they're going to be in that position. But once I explain the products, you'll understand why, and then you can understand how you would apply it. Professional 1 is strictly hydration and bacterial control. So what does that mean? Hydration is, the word hydration is we lower the pH. It's the acidifier. That's what makes it a hydration solution. And then of course we put additives in there, like you'll see foaming and stuff like that in different solutions. Well, the foaming is a surfactant, which increases uptake. So that's what deems it a hydration solution. And then bacterial control. So we're keeping that pollution in check. But if it's a flower that requires some carbohydrates, you're going to get some shattering, or you're going to lose petals, or for instance, roses store energy pretty well. But if you see roses, if you put it in there and you leave them in there indefinitely, eventually roses will start to bloom. And when that happens, it's starvation. It didn't have any carbohydrates. Right. So it does need carbohydrates at a certain point. So typically, even with the Professional 1, we don't recommend storing it longer than 3 days. That's kind of the tipping point where you're saying, hey, the flowers are going to need some energy. You're going to start losing color. You're going to start losing bloom performance. You're going to start losing, if it has a scent or whatever. But so yeah, so you see the function there. But if you're turning fast, it's a good product to use, and the reason is because it's the cheapest. The sugars drive the costs higher, because sugars is a commodity, and yeah, I mean, you look at anything that's sugar based, and the prices are high right now. So yeah, so Professional 1, Professional 2 has like 30% carbohydrates. So we give it a small amount of carbohydrates, to give the flower energy. You'll get some development, but it's not designed to pop it open. So typically that would be something you'd use in your storage cooler or in a display. If you have bucket display or something, if you're cash and carry, depends on your business model. Or if you're a wet pack shipper out of Miami, or yeah, you got flowers at the farmer's market or something like that. I'm trying to think of all the different models, or just plain storing. The flowers won't starve. There's enough carbohydrates in there to give it energy and keep the flower going. And then professional, and it also has the acidifier and the biocide. So we're acidifying. So that's why you see people say, well, I use number 2, I don't use number 1. Well, they're still doing really well with number 2. So, and let me back up a little bit. If they're dealing with some aged product that's imported and they know it's aged, and they know that there's probably not, maybe some vascular blockages, they might want to use number 1 just to get that flower pumped up and get it going again. Because at the farm level, they use RVB, which is the grower version of number 1, because we're rehydrating. At grower level, they use RVB, which is sold in Colombia and Ecuador, and they pump them up really good for that journey. And then once they get here, or to a retailer or to a wholesaler, often they're dehydrated again because they've been in that box for,
Right.
I
Who
don't know,
knows?
7 days, 6 days, 10 days, I don't know. So we need to get that vascular system back up, get it drinking again. So a rehydration process is necessary. Now, whether it's 1 or 2, sometimes that depends how close to the market you are. If you're a wholesaler in Georgia versus a wholesaler in California, well, California's got more days on it than you do because their transport time is longer. So, it's going to vary based on those kind of variables. That's why can't say always and can't say never. And, I try to, everything's a little bit tailored to the need, a little bit. So,
Well, and that's important. That's an important distinction because,
yeah,
you're absolutely right. You can't throw everybody under one umbrella
no.
because every situation is different and the timeline is important, and the flower is important. Yeah, RVB. I'd forgot about RVB because a long time ago we used to sell RVB, or we would see RVB for sale.
Well, yeah. Well, that was a change of the marketing. What we did is we used to sell. Okay, if you want to go back in time, for those who are old Chrysal, Chrysalettes, let's call them. We used to sell RVB hydrator. Then we had professional. It was just called professional, and then we had universal. And so so we changed RVB to number 1. We changed professional to number 2. And we changed universal to number 3. So we created the professional wine, 1, 2, 3. Now, could you use all 3 products? Absolutely, you could. But it doesn't mean that the flowers go from 1 to 2 to 3. You could take all your woodies and hard to hydrates and put them in number 1. You could put all the others in number 2, and that's your processing. And then when it goes out the door in a vase, you use the number 3. So you technically would be using all 3 products. And there's advantages to that because you're again, you don't want blowing wide open in the cooler. You want that to happen in the consumer's home. You want them to see that full development.
Yeah.
Now there are people who use number 2 in the vase. Here's the analogy I like to give. If you had 2 flowers and one's in number 2 and one's in number 3, and all things are equal, let's just say, with those 2 flowers, they'll go over the days and they're developing. I don't know if you can see, I'm doing a fake aperture opening, and they're going like this. And then maybe the number 2 kind of runs out of energy and the number 3 kind of pushes all the way to the max. So the 3 is going to get you a bigger opening, but it isn't that the life goes longer. The death would be the same, because all we can do is maximize that life. We if we do charts like the science they do from the labs, they'll create a lifeline when and every flower has a lifeline, right, when it's on the plant, and there's that lifeline.
Right.
So our goal is to handle that flower to stay as close to that lifeline as possible, but any hiccup can change that where it is on that lifeline. And that's, we're going to have it. You're going to have delays, you're going to have issues. You're going to have, and now one way you can extend, it's the only exception, cold chain. I mean, everybody knows about cold chain. Managing your cooler temperatures is huge. Keeping your temperatures below 40 is a big deal. You're losing vase life if you get over that. So it's, yeah, service your unit, keep it clean, and keep the temperatures below 40. Ideally, we'd like to see 33, 34. But, you know, if you're a little bit higher, it's still pretty good. I know that's hard to maintain in a retail shop and even a wholesale because you're going in and out so much. But having those plastic drapes, which are a pain because they're slapping you in the face and everything, they're good because that's what they're doing. They're helping keep some of that temperature in there. And that's the whole reason. But that leads me to another idea is cold water hydration. You know, that's a big deal also. We're fans of cold water. Slow hydration is good hydration. Okay. So a nice cold drink and let it hydrate there slow overnight is like the best. There's a lot of guys, big shippers, they do cold water. They ship everything in cold water. You know, they have chillers and they chill the water down. And because the plant, remember, it's going from a cooler that's 33 degrees and then into a bucket. So if you put that in, you know, a tepid water temperature, you know, 60 degrees or so, it's kind of a shock to that plant. So think about everything you do at every step is stress to the flower, whether it's slamming it on the bench, dropping the boxes on the floor, leaving them in the dark boxes longer than they need to be, temperature swings, all those things are stress to the flowers. It causes them to, you know, really, they're not happy, you know, all the vibration, all the movement, and that's what creates your ethylene problems.
Okay,
you know?
so stop 1 second because you are making great transitions, but I got to go back to a couple things real quick because I want to talk about ethylene. But before we do that, so I know we've talked about some solutions for growers and different stages, depending on how long they're keeping them, how fast they're turning the product. And then you were talking about the solution, the professional number 3 solution. And I feel like that is really something more that the florists need to use. That's more of their sweet spot because they're trying to keep that flower developing and fresh and stuff. And I'm assuming that also has the biocides. It also has the pH.
It's like if you use the same terms I did on the other one, I said 30% carbs. If you go into the food solutions, you're looking at like 90% carbs.
Oh, wow.
It's a big jump in the carbs. Now, in the case of a florist, I still recommend them using number 2 in their storage coolers and then using the 3 out the door because they're going to push that flower maybe a little too fast in there if they're just storing, right? So I like to see them use the number 2 in the cooler for the reason that it doesn't break down because of the lesser sugars. Okay, let me back up. Okay, so the more sugars you have, that introduces pollution eventually, right?
It feeds bacteria too.
Thank you. If I have a sandwich sitting here on the table, eventually mold starts growing on it and everything, right? And it's kind of the same thing, you know, it's the food. And so eventually it's because the biocides aren't real heavy, it eventually will start to break down. And then it also isn't really set up for a heavy bio load. And what I mean by bio load is when you've put 100 stems in a single bucket with a gallon of water, it's a heavy bio load on that 1 gallon of water. So you need a little stronger solution to combat that pollution and keep it in check. But then you need some food. Where when you go into a vase, your bio load is much lighter. You know, it's maybe 10 stems or 20 stems. You know, it's not as heavy.
But the amount of water, though, is a lot less, too, isn't it?
Well, it's probably a liter in most cases.
Well, yeah, close.
A liter there's 3.785 liters in a gallon, to be exact. So that, but you're talking 100 stems. And so your load on those flowers, plus they're cleaned already, too, by the way.
True.
So when you're putting them in the grower bucket or when you're unpacking, it's getting a lot of foliage, a lot of junk, a lot of, you know, stuff is going in there. So, but when they're designing, they're being very careful. They're being clean. They're making sure they're not putting any stems. So your bio load in general is lower for those reasons.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So yeah. So using the number 3 out the door is the way I promote that. And then the packet, the little giveaway packet, that's also number 3, but it's a powder form. Whether it's a powder or a liquid, those are all food solutions in that case. And I always recommend giving it away, even if you do a vase, because if the, well, kind of depends. If the flowers are well hydrated, they won't drink a lot. If the flowers haven't had proper hydration, they'll drink that vase down in one day. And then the consumer is going to top up with tap water.
Mm.
So giving a sachet away, a packet of food, is a good idea. And of course, if you're cash and carry, it's a must. You know, if they're taking just a bundle of flowers and putting them in their own vase, you have to give food with it. I mean, otherwise you're just doing a disservice. And if it's that expensive, you know, add 20 cents to the bouquet. You know, it's not going to stop the sale, I'm pretty sure.
Well, I know
You
we
know,
give it away. We give it away all the time.
yeah, I mean,
Boxes. I mean, it's crazy.
and you should teach them
And
how
it's
to use it.
pennies. And it's just pennies, really.
And you should teach them how to use it. Like, okay, I give you an easy way to gauge it. If you know, the regular drinking water bottle, it's 500 mLs. Everybody here, we drink the Zephyr Hills as our brand, but one of those is a half a liter, which is the 5-gram packet. So if you want to know, because I go into dosing, I should hit on that too, because it's a big failure rate. Dosage rate is important. Dosage is the difference between success and when people say, I tried it, it didn't work.
Say that one more time, because you cut out for a second. The difference between...
I said dosage rate is the difference between success and failure,
yeah,
with the product. So if you overdose, it can become toxic. If you underdose, it creates more pollution. So it's a lose-lose deal. So accuracy is important. It's like taking a medication. You want to apply it because the compounds, like we talked about, the acidifiers, the biocides, the foods, they're balanced perfectly to work together at the volume of water that's recommended on the label. So when you overdo it or underdo it, you dilute it. So the pollution, the food just kind of acts as pollution because not enough biocides to combat it. And it, you know, so it gets polluted. And then the other way, if you overdo it, it'll burn if you use too much. It becomes phototoxic and you get crispy foliage and things like that. So I am a big stickler on dosage, and I know I say it 50 times. If I'm lucky, I get 1 out of 50 that actually does it. But I keep doing it for 29 years because I believe in it. There's easy ways to do it. You know, you could get a Dosatron, which is one, and Dosatron is the scariest thing about it. Just the word Dosatron. Most people don't know how to say it. But other than that, it's a pretty simple machine. It just runs on water flow, and as the water passes, the piston drives, and then the pump will siphon up the solution and blend it inside and pump it out mixed. Now, it is a piece of equipment. If you don't maintenance it, it will fail. Eventually, they do fail. So you have to keep up with them. You have to pay attention to them. They have a clicking sound. You listen to them. Dosatron backs up the product really good. I always recommend people, hey, go to their website, call their customer service. They're fantastic. If you ever have a question about it, don't understand or want to know if it's working, they're great at backing up their product. And I always,
well, I think growers, well, we use one. We have a Dosatron. Yeah. And I know when I used to grow in greenhouses, we had Dosatrons for fertilizer and all that kind of stuff. So it's a pretty common piece of equipment. And I know flower shops might not have one unless they do a lot of volume, because they might think, well, why do I need that? But it is nice to automatically have something pre-mixed. It does, it's interesting because I was preparing for our chat. I was really glad that you brought this up, because the whole idea of diluting the solution or overdosing the solution is something that people don't think about. Again, trying to cut corners, or how can you have too much of a good thing? I mean, or
a little bit is better than nothing.
That's right, exactly. Well, it's interesting because so from Europe, when we during viburnum and
Oh
lilac
yeah,
season, we get
yeah.
these little black packets, and
Specialty food.
I tell all of our employees, and I tell the customers, I'm like, use that product. That product makes the branch thing it's an amazing thing. I have seen that product take lilac that was very stressed, and
Yeah.
not only did it come back, but it opened. It was amazing. I mean, it's just same thing with viburnums. I've seen that time and time again, and it's just gold. But I had a customer one time that I told that to. They went home, they put some lilac in the vase, then they emptied that entire packet into that vase. Well, the vase wasn't very big.
Oh,
And they're
cooked them.
like, "Why? Every time I do this it burns it up." And I'm like, and I was frustrated for them too, because I'm like, I swear by these little black packets. And I said, I don't know. So we talked through and we talked through and we talked through, and finally I said, how much water went into that vase? Like, how big is this vase? And then she was telling me, and I'm like, well, that's probably the problem. You probably just burnt
Yeah.
it up because that's
Yeah.
so strong, and that lilac was already stressed, and now it's just fried. And
That's
so,
right.
as soon as she started doing it with the proper dilution rate, the lilac next time was like, glorious. And it does make a big difference. And
That's
I
right.
wish there was a way that we could buy those black packets. I'm just going to put that in
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because,
No, you're not the first one to say that.
yeah,
We used to
so,
have a product that would work. It was called Select, and we just couldn't sell enough of it to maintain it as a product. And um, we sold some, and it had everybody who bought it was loyal, but we just at that time couldn't get enough users doing it, and so it went away.
well, it's
But that
kind of a
was years ago.
seasonal thing too, because I think it's
That's
something
probably why.
more spring
Yeah,
oriented than year
yeah,
round.
yeah.
But I would buy some for
But we
us.
sold it in a pail instead of the packets. It was in
Packets.
a little bucket. But yeah. But no, there's easy ways for small shops to do it, and you're never too small to do it right. Just because you're big and you can't afford automation, it doesn't mean you
Right.
still can't put together protocols. And here's one of the easiest ways you could do it: get you a 5-gallon igloo, figure out how much solution treats 5 gallons, fill it up, and then you just fill, whether you're filling a bud vase, a tray, a liter vase,
That's a
it's
great
done right.
idea.
It's
Yeah.
just a water cooler. So come up with simple solutions like that. Another way to manage use. I can give you an example. I've gone to wholesale houses. I've been to wholesalers and retailers coast to coast, and in fact, I met you first in a wholesale house. I don't know, it's probably 25 years ago, in your past company.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, you can. I go in there and they say, "Wow, this stuff is costing too much." And I look and I say, "Well, you got 2.5 gallons in that bucket. Those flowers are never going to drink 2.5 gallons. You're throwing that away. You're wasting solution." So coming up with a way that you can manage your solution, and that's cost. I mean, if you're using 2 gallons and you can go to a gallon, you just cut your expense in half. I could never discount it that much. So those are the kind of ways of managing your treatment that is smart treatment. Here's another one. The professional 2 in the cooler is a week-long solution. So if you turn the flowers fast, cut more flowers and put them in there. Use it again.
That okay to
If you still
do?
got a full bucket and it's only been in there for a day or two, cut more, put them in there, use it again. Save your time in filling and dumping and scrubbing, and use it again. But that doesn't negate you to keep doing that forever. I mean, you do at a certain point need to do that recycle where you dump, scrub, and refill again. But yeah, if you're turning fast, my answer is good. You just cut your expense in half on the labor of processing the buckets and filling them and cleaning them and the solution itself. So that's just a good tip.
Great
So
point.
there's tips that you can do throughout that are going to save you money. One way is maybe mark the height of your bucket, how much you want it filled. So your employees, you say, fill to that line. Make it idiot proof. I'm not calling them idiots. They're important. The processor's my favorite person because that's the guy working with my product. but you want to make it where you
A
just say, hey, fill that
standardized.
line. You
Yeah,
don't have
well,
to
you
think
have
about it.
right, exactly, because you don't know who's been trained at what level, and you have somebody step in that doesn't know, and if it's standardized, it does make it
That's right.
simpler. Yeah, I
And building
agree.
a standard program manual works. And then we have like the tea bag also is a product that's in the form for number 2 also, and which is basically just like it is. It's a tea bag type material. So the product steeps through it just like tea would. So you throw the pouch in there and the solution dissolves, but the pouch remains. So it's visual aid. It's been treated. You can look at any bucket and you know it.
Exactly.
But secondly, your cost. It's a fixed cost because you're putting it in a bucket. And if you get, depending on the size you get, we have we have a quart and a half, we have a gallon. I think there's a 2 liter, they come in bigger volumes, but anyway, but throw it in there, mark the buckets to the size you use, and boom, you have a fixed cost. You're manually dosing, and you can do it right without equipment. And in fact, I think manual can actually be more accurate 52 weeks out of the year if you have a protocol in place that all your employees understand and are following than a machine, because you turn your back, that machine can fail, and or the drum is empty and somebody's pumping away and going, hey, I don't know, my flowers are dying. You go over there and shake the drum, you go, your drum's empty. I mean, who knows how long the drum was empty? Maybe it was empty for, maybe you just processed, $50,000 worth of flowers and didn't even treat them. There's a lot of untreated flowers that happen just by not, going over and give the drum a kick every day and see where it's at, just see if it's, we used to put a tag on it, kick me, just come over and kick me, just to try to get people to remember to come over and give it a little, kick the drum. So
I love that. That's hilarious.
yeah.
I've got okay. I have a lot of questions still. We got to cover here. You started talking about before I interrupted you ethylene, and I know that over the years, people tried to get us to put ethylene scrubbers in the coolers. I know, especially flower shops, I always cringe when I walk in, and maybe I don't need to, but I think I do. If you walk in and you see fruit baskets in the same cooler with your fresh flowers.
Yeah.
I know these are all real life things, and I want you to help us understand ethylene and the effects of it.
Yeah, keeping your fruits away from your flowers is a good idea. Definitely shouldn't be in the same cooler. That's not a good idea. Ethylene really isn't the only thing. There's different phases. At grower level, we have a couple of different treatments they can have. We have a chemical which is called 1-MCP, which is a gas. We call it ethylene buster is the brand name. And it comes in 2 forms. It comes in a little packet that they wet and drop inside the box. It emits a gas, and the gas adheres itself to the receptors of the flower, stops that production, it blocks it. So, and then we have that, but the thing is with that product, it's not for the life of the flower. So it might cover that flower for the distribution channel, but if it's long storage in that retail florist shop, it probably will lose its effects. So there's another product called AVB, which that one's taken up systemically, and it stays with the flower for the life of the flower and is the best one. So that one, will go all the way through the consumer, adding benefits. Like you can tell a delphinium that's treated and not delphinium that's not. If you treated a delphinium with the AVB, you could shake it and it's not going to drop blooms. But if you shake it and it drops blooms, it's not treated. And there's a lot of untreated flowers that go out the door every day. And so, there's always, a delphinium. That's why you'll say, why am I buying this delphinium from this guy and it works out great, and from this guy I always have troubles? Well, it's right. The grower's protocols. One grower has a better protocol than the other grower, or maybe his processor was sick that week and somebody else filled in. Think about it. If everybody doesn't know the process and everybody isn't in on the game, it can easily slip through, and then you get some bad flowers for a week or 2. And it only takes once to lose a customer. And then they switch for you and teach you a lesson for a number of weeks before they come back and start buying from you again, right? You got to mend it. But so ethylene can be treated there. Now, ways that a florist can control ethylene, or a wholesaler, really your best way is good airflow is one of your best. Low temperatures, keeping the coolers cold. when the temperatures are, let's say 35 degrees, there's not a lot of development going on there. The flowers are barely breathing. They're very slow. So they're not developing a lot of gas. So those are the things that you can do the best. Now, you say the absorbers work only if the air, it has to pass through it, you
Mm.
know? So if there isn't a mechanism to make it go through it, because it captures is what it does.
Like a
So
filter.
right. So where our products are treating the flowers, where that's more like treating the air, as long as the
There's
ethylene flows through it. It has to flow through it. But once you get into an open space, usually you don't have a problem with the ethylene. Like when it goes into a showroom floor where there's a lot of space, a lot of air movement, ethylene usually isn't a problem at that point. But it usually will have revealed itself before it gets to that point, because you already see a lot of shattering going on pre. And then there's some flowers that people just don't treat them, and people just accept it that, oh, they shatter, that's the way they are. Well, there's a way to resolve that could stop, because we're about filling in the weaknesses. That's all we do. You have breeders that are constantly trying to breed to fix these problems, but they can't always. And it's great when one will reveal it and say, hey, in all honesty, you need to use this treatment in the beginning, because then growers in the beginning would know this and develop the recipe, because, hey, it's a great variety, it just needs this treatment, it needs a little help to get it there. And if they know that and they apply it, they'll have huge success. But otherwise, you happen to teach people, well, yeah, they shatter, that's just kind of normal. And which I don't think is a good way to sell something. You want to that not to be a problem. I don't know who wants to be making up excuses like that.
yeah.
So, but anyway, but yeah, ethylene also, a lot of the varieties haven't even been tested. It's advancing. So the species that are coming out different. I'm convinced that a lot of roses are ethylene sensitive, more flowers than we know. And the longer they're in dry storage, the more flowers become susceptible, because they all can be at a certain point, right, of stress. And now you have sea container freight going on. You
Right.
have and so flowers could be in darkness for a month, or depending on where it's coming from. If it's coming from Africa, easily a month. If it's coming from Colombia, it could be 2-3 weeks, that it's been in darkness. So these long extended periods of darkness and can cause some stress. Now, part of that is they have good temperature control, and so they're able to beat a lot of those problems, because temperature puts the flower at rest. So its respiration is very, very low, very, very low. So it's really why they can do it. But if there's any kind of stress that happens along the way, it can reveal itself in those sort of things. But yeah, as far as the retail florist, airflow, cooler temperature, and don't put your produce, and don't smoke on your flowers, any kind of exhaust, these sort of things, in the wintertime, backing your van up to the door and letting it blow exhaust into your
Yeah.
shop, that's just pumping it full of ethylene. That's not good.
That's a good
Well,
point.
it's not ethylene, but the gas.
Yeah, carbon
Yeah,
dioxide or whatever it is. Yeah.
exactly. So, but yeah, so that's,
Interesting.
yeah.
Well, okay. I know we're getting short on time, and there's a couple things still left. I want to make sure we cover. One of the things I was really excited to see is this move to some of your more sustainable products.
Yeah, yeah,
One of which is the Arrive Alive Eco. I know
yeah.
one of the things that sort of blossomed, if I can say that, out of the pandemic was a lot of small to mid-size flower farmers that didn't
Oh
ship
yeah,
before are now shipping flowers or shipping mixed bouquets.
yeah.
And rather than trying to find plastic or whatever, it's trying to find a ecological way or environmentally friendly way to put something around the base of that bouquet to make it ship better. Um, I was super excited about that. maybe can you explain? Because when you see this plastic bag, you think, is it plastic? And I'm calling it a plastic bag, but it's not a plastic bag. So maybe can you explain to us exactly what the sustainable benefits are of your Arrive
Yeah,
Alive Eco?
yeah. Okay, so the bag is made up of a corn base, so it'll just compost, and then the wrap itself is cellulose, which is a wood fiber, and has a small amount of PLA, which is acceptable under the guidelines for eco and for compostability, and it's 10%, and that's just enough to keep it, because if you take that out, it'll just fall apart. It won't be a whole product. So you need that small amount to make it a complete product. But then, yeah, it'll just compost, and you can with your green waste. So, but yeah, the company is trying to move towards finding products like this. And now the challenge is getting people to pay a little extra, because this type of technology costs more money. Now, does it cost more money because it really costs more money to make it? I don't know, because we don't make the bags. We have to source these products from manufacturers, and we make the product a product by pulling these products together. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not, we're not the manufacturer of the bag itself. So but as a whole, it ends up running, like 6 cents a wrap more. Now, do people want sustainability? If they do, they have to put up the extra money, and some are willing to do it, some are not. So it kind of just depends on what's more important.
Well, if more
And that's
people use it, then that will
yeah,
help dictate the demand. I mean, the demand
yeah,
always dictates
yeah,
the
and
product.
yeah, and
Yeah.
exactly. And when sustainable products are selling this amount, and the foam is selling this, and when this starts to teeter, things will change. But you got to get the volumes to a point that they, warrant us being able, as a manufacturer, buying the materials to get better costs, and to leverage that volume. And but also there's a limited amount of people making those sort of things. So you kind of are, until that market continues to grow, you're kind of
Right.
cornered into dealing with limited manufacturers of those products, and it makes it really, really hard, to be honest.
Well,
I
I feel like the more these things grow in popularity,
Yeah,
or people understand, we're talking pennies,
yeah.
and it
In the big
is
picture,
in the
yes.
big picture, it's
Yeah,
better for everything.
yeah,
That I feel like the end consumer is willing to pay a quarter, 50 cents more to be more environmentally friendly. I mean, they do it every day at a grocery store when they buy a tote to carry their groceries in versus a plastic
yeah,
bag or different things like that. I also like the fact that these sachets, I'm holding one up here, these sachets now you're also being made with paper instead
yeah.
of the plastic, which I think is a great thing. And this is, it says universal on here. So this is the
That's
number
the number
three.
three. Well, it'd be
Yeah.
number. It's a food. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I think this is great.
yeah,
And even says flower boost on it. So we know that's a good thing.
yeah.
So I'm
And we
excited
have
about
actually
all that.
one other eco one,
Yeah.
which is a professional 2 product, and it's different in a couple of senses. Now, right, it's a first of all, it's we call it bag in a box. Okay,
Okay.
so it's an 85% reduction in plastics, so it's a big deal. But what we did is we took, first of all, there's 2 things we did that shifted things dramatically. If you took a 5-gallon can of the professional number 2, the dosage rate of that is 100-to-1 ratio. So 1 gallon makes 100 gallons. So if we have 5 gallons, it makes 500 gallons. We doubled the concentration. So now we have a container that's 2.5 gallons that's yielding the same as the 5-gallon can.
Oh, wow. I
So
didn't know that.
now we're dealing with a much smaller package. So we just reduced the plastics huge right there. And then it's a very small, thin membrane plastic with a heavy corrugated box on the outside that's fully recyclable. So once it's empty, you just crush it, put it in your recycling bin, and crush your box, throw it in your recycling bin. So the package is completely recyclable, versus the other one is, it's a virgin heavy plastic container.
Yeah, that was really
So
heavy plastic too.
right, but
So
then people
yeah,
have to understand that the price isn't any cheaper in this case. They're basically the same. So because it's the same yield, they're not, but they're going to save in handling because over here you lift this can, it's 72 pounds, and you lift this one over here and it's 36 pounds. So if you're moving it, it's much lighter. If you're shipping it, it's much lighter. So there's some
smaller.
really advantages to moving to that product. Now, if you have a Dosatron, you have to change your Dosatron setting. Right now it's set for 100 to 1. You have to change it to 200 to 1. But that's simple.
Yeah.
Um, and you're going to get a higher yield out of it. So anyway, I'm excited about that one. And but trying to get that translation that yes, this one is X and this one is the same, and get them to match it up, that look at the bigger savings. You are saving in freight, because if you're shipping on your flower truck, you're saving probably a cube, and
Which is a
that's
lot.
whatever your cube rate is.
Yeah.
If you're shipping by UPS or FedEx, it's half the weight. It's 36 pounds instead of 72, which I don't even know if they allow 70. Yeah, they do. We do. Oh, it's 69. I'm sorry, I got the numbers not quite right. But anyway, needless to say, it's a product I'm excited about. And what I find is regionally, people are using it in certain regions, and but it's just trying to get the masses on board to go to that. I think it's a good thing. So that's our three main eco products that we're promoting to flower shops today and wholesalers.
Well, I know I have samples of them. I'm gonna share some photographs of it and some more details about it when we release this episode. I also know that the podcast, we have a link, and every episode, if you scroll down in the show notes, there's a link for Chrysal, and it
Yeah,
takes it to your site, and you can set up account and get, they have points for, membership stuff that you can
yeah.
use. And we have a discount code that off the top of my head I don't remember, but we're gonna include that right afterwards. I have so many codes I can't remember right now, but I do want to ask as my last question, because I always love to ask this, and you've given so much great advice. I'm curious, is there a piece of advice that in particular you'd like to leave with our listeners, that has either been meant a lot to you or something you just like to share?
Um, yeah, I mean, I believe that we all, and I don't care where you are at in the businesses, we're in the business of making people smile, and people love flowers, and it doesn't matter male or female. But I think the key is we have to give good value, and I think that's one of the most important things, is good value. And I say that because I'm going to give you a quick little story. Don't have time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so my niece was telling me, and she was an adult niece, not a child, and she says, I don't like flowers. And I said, I disagree with you. And she goes, no, I don't like flowers. And I said, I think you do. Okay, let me set the stage. I come to visit you for dinner, and I come with this beautiful bouquet of flowers, and I hand them to you. And she looks at me because I'm putting my hands as though I'm putting it to her. She smiles, and I said, you just answered that you like flowers. You're smiling. And she's like, oh. I said, so maybe it's not the flowers that you don't like. What is it? And she goes, well, they don't last. So what I got to say is, people, we have to make the flowers last. Do everything in your power to put in a good program so you can put out a great product, and that people buy more flowers, because it's a win-win for all of us. So
That's
thank you.
awesome.
Thank you for inviting me. It was fun sharing and doing what I love to do. I've been doing this 25 years or 29 years, and I still like it. It's fun. So
Well, I can't thank you enough for doing it, and I know that lots of people will learn more about the importance of this and what it can do. So, thank you, Dennis, again, and everybody, stay tuned. We're going to share the code and the link and everything here in just a second.